Forks of Cypress, which includes not just the house that was here. When we say the Forks of Cypress, most folks think of just of the house, but there was a large agricultural establishment from 1818, and it was built by the Jackson family, who were among the founders of Florence. They came here from Nashville, and along with others from Nashville, the chief investors and many of the earliest settlers were from the area around the Cumberland River, around Nashville. And they came here because of the river and because of the streams, the tributaries that were good places for mills. And from the very beginning, this was a textile producing place. People grew cotton and made horses. The Forks have proven to be extremely important. James Jackson was born in Ireland. He came to this country in the latter part of the 18th century, along with the whole generation. His brothers and sisters and cousins, probably a couple of dozen of his family. And they, as good Irish folks, were passionate horse people. And they loved the horses, and they loved to try to improve the stock. It was a period in American history when there was a craze for thoroughbred racing. I cannot tell you the scale and the interest that the sport consumed in this country. You cannot imagine. Some people pay attention to the Kentucky Derby now, but there were periodicals that people got in the mail all over the country, an enormous readership that would come out a couple of times a month, and they would give all of the racing news and all of the racing gossip all over the entire country, from New England all the way to the Gulf. And the interest, it was a golden age of American racing. James Jackson's part was not so much racing. He was not so interested in his horses winning races. He wanted to develop the stock, and to do that, he used his contacts in London to look out for the very best breeding stock that could be had, and he bought those horses. He bought and imported to this country about a dozen thoroughbreds. He was not the only one doing that at the time, but he was the most successful of those who were doing that, because 3 of those horses have proven to be the foundation, not the only foundation stock to the thoroughbred horses of today, but major. Glencoe, the best known, the most important of the horses. A horse called Leviathan, and a mare called Gallopade were the most successful ones. If you look at the pedigree of any thoroughbred horse in the world today, and the records are, you can imagine, no people's pedigree has ever been kept as carefully as those of thoroughbred horses. But they'll all go back to those horses. You'll find Glencoe not just once, but a number of times in the pedigree of all the horses today. Of both, Um, the the quarters, the log houses uh, that were the residences of most of the people who were uh, who were in slavery at the forts. Those houses are for the most, they are all gone. Now there were a couple of them that stood within my memory. Uh, they lay north of the columns that you saw, and they there was a road that went from about where those columns were, pretty much due north, and it was lined with fruit trees. There's a record of what all was planted, and then along that, you know, were these log houses. You can see the chimney of one log house that was still there, but actually, that house, although it was in later days occupied by slaves, it was originally built, we're pretty sure, by the Cherokee, because it was standing there, and it had been Doublehead's, part of Doublehead's property. It was standing before the Treaty of 1816, and so that during the construction of the house that you see the columns remaining there. During the construction of that, the Jackson family lived in that log house. It later became the office, the plantation, and and residence for servants. Now there were other body servants, uh, so called uh, people who were in slavery but did not, but they lived in the house, and some of them actually occupied the same sleeping quarters with the Jackson family. They slept in the rooms with a, it would be something that we might call a day bed uh, that would be right in the very same room or in the there were these great spacious hallways. They might have been sleeping arrangements in the hallways, but probably more no more than three or four. I'm guessing because I don't really know. Uh, there are in the 19th century, people were buried where they died because transporting somebody over a distance was just not practical for burial. So there are people who were not part of the Jackson family who were buried there. Uh, there are, I'm going to venture, at least four graves uh, along the eastern wall of the enclosure there of that cemetery, uh, the graves of jockeys who rode the thoroughbred horses. And they would have been African Americans in slavery, but they were buried not in the African American cemetery, you know, uh, just east of the family cemetery. They were buried in the family cemetery. So they were critical. They were it was a measure of regard that they had for him. Most of those graves were vandalized because in the 1960s there was a tremendous amount of damage, and a lot of the markers were destroyed or carried off. We don't know what happened to them. I found some odds and end pieces in the ditch, behind there, and we've restored it as well as we can. But I know that there were jockeys' graves there that the stones have disappeared, and the two that are left are in an approximation of where those were. I I tried to do some research and find out their names, and the only one that I can be certain of was Leander Harris was one of those jockeys, and I suspect that his grave was one of those. Wintertime, if you come when this is not so thick, uh, you can see that there are rows, and you can see that a very slight depression. You can see the outline of. In fact, this is a whole row I can see right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to get used to it. You have to. It's not apparent quickly. Right. You asked me that earlier, and I couldn't give you a very accurate answer, but I've done my research. Uh, there are more than 200 graves in the. We call it the African American Cemetery because it began at the same time the forts was established, and the people who were buried there before 1863 were in slavery. But the cemetery was in use well into the 20th century. I mean, halfway through the 20th century. So I don't know what to tell you. I did look at James Jackson's will, which was 1840, and the number of slaves that were listed by name who were recorded in the will was 61, and that's adults and children.